excitation, contraction, coupling. Okay, so where does this start? Where does this end? This starts with the transfer of a nervous impulse or an action potential. You can call them both. A nervous impulse is an action potential, or an action potential is a nervous impulse, whatever you want to say. So this is the event that comes from the transmission of that nervous impulse from a neuron to a muscle that results in the contraction. So results in contraction of muscle. Where does it take place in terms of skeletal muscle? It's going to take place at this thing called the neuromuscular junction. So we have the neuron part, there's the neuro, and we have the muscle part, the muscular part. The junction is the meeting of these two places. So the neuromuscular junction, this is an indirect connection between a neuron and a skeletal muscle cell. So our neuron, what we call it is a somatic motor neuron. Let's look at that word. So somatic means body cell versus sex cell. So this is, that was whenever we were doing cellular division. In this case, when we talk about somatic, we're talking about the somatic nervous system. So you might have heard of the autonomic nervous system, your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. Those are your automatic functions, like your heartbeat, like your breathing. Your somatic talks about skeletal muscle. We know that we contract skeletal muscle, so somatic refers to skeletal muscle here. Somatic motor, we know that we're activating this muscle for contraction, so it's a motor neuron instead of a sensory neuron, and then neuron. So if he says, what kind of neuron occurs at a neuromuscular junction? It is a somatic motor neuron. On the other side, we have, and remember, this is an indirect connection, so I need a space, and we have a certain name for that space too. Then I need that plasma membrane of my muscle cell. Remember, we called that plasma membrane a sarcolemma. Where we have this modification of the sarcolemma near the motor neuron, we're going to call this area, this whole area, we're going to call it the motor end plate. So that's our motor end plate. Within the sarcolemma, or whatever you want to say, you can clearly see there's this differentiation or this modification of the sarcolemma. That we have these folds here. So these folds, these individual folds, are called junctional folds. So this is a junctional fold, that's a junctional fold, that's a junctional fold, that's a junctional fold. What's the point of a junctional fold? If I drew that same exact picture with just a flat sarcolemma, then I could put a receptor here and here and here and here and here. But since I have these junctional folds, I've increased my surface area, which allows me to have a lot of receptors. So these junctional folds are going to increase surface area to allow for more receptors. What are these receptors for? These receptors are for something called a neurotransmitter. These neurotransmitters are stored in the ends and the axons. So if I drew a neuron, we did this in a few videos ago in Unit 2, but if I drew a neuron, then I would have a few different parts. I'd have this top part, this cell body, then this axon, this long part. At the very end of the axon, we have something called an axon terminal, but we can also call it a synaptic end bulb or a synaptic bulb. If you remember, a bulb is that bulging in our hair follicle, so now we have another bulging. You can see I have this bulge at the end of my neuron. So at the end of this motor neuron, I have these vesicles, and these vesicles are filled with these chemicals called neurotransmitters. So let's clean this up a bit. We know that this is a somatic motor neuron, so I'm going to get rid of that. I know at this axon terminal, or at this synaptic bulb, I know that I have vesicles, and these vesicles contain chemicals. These chemicals are called neurotransmitters. So these neurotransmitters can bind to receptors on the opposite side and cause some changes to this muscle cell. What neurotransmitter are we looking at for skeletal muscle specifically? This is called ACH, acetylcholine. So acetylcholine is the neurotransmitter for skeletal muscle, and it's abbreviated ACH. So we'll use ACH for now. So on the other side, if I have these chemicals have to bind to receptors. So what do we think we have over here on these junctional folds? On these junctional folds, I have ACH receptors. Okay, so let's see what else we need to tell this story. We have the axon terminal with these vesicles in them holding these neurotransmitters specifically for skeletal muscle. We have acetylcholine, that's the only one we're using. On the other side of this neuromuscular junction, remember this is the neuromuscular junction. So at this junction between my nerve and my muscle, just talked about the neuro part. At this muscular part, we call it the motor end plate. That's this modification of the sarcolemma. And when I look at this modification of the motor end plate, these singular folds are called junctional folds. They're increasing the surface area of the sarcolemma to allow more receptor sites. This modification of the sarcolemma only occurs at the motor end plate, or near the motor neuron. Okay, so motor end plate, motor neuron, neuromuscular junction. We have this space in between our neuron and our muscle, and this is called a cleft or a synaptic cleft, because a space can also be called a synapse. So you should be familiar with all these words: synaptic cleft, synapse, or just cleft. All right. I have my neuron, I've got my vesicles with my neurotransmitter. Those neurotransmitters are released from vesicles. How do vesicles release their stuff normally? Through an active transport process called exocytosis. So these neurotransmitters are going to leave this axon, synaptic end bowl, whatever you want to say, and then I'll have neurotransmitters within my synaptic cleft, and they can diffuse and bind to these receptors over here, these acetylcholine receptors, and we'll get some changes going on over here in the muscles. Alright, so if you want to pause and go back and review this neuromuscular junction, I'm going to start getting into the physiology of what's occurring here.